This is from the book, The Network Awakens. It's chapter 1, Network Coordination Challenge. The morning mist rising from the harbor carried the scent of possibility as Joe Martinez stood in his original city apartment, surrounded by coordination systems that would determine the future of consciousness communities. These systems would either prove that authentic awakening work could scale across multiple cities, or reveal that the transition from local intimacy to regional networks required entirely different approaches. The challenge lay in serving human development through awareness practices that honored both individual awakening and collective empowerment while maintaining the essential relationship-based qualities that made consciousness work genuinely transformative. His apartment had evolved from a simple living space into a nerve center connecting with spiritual communities in Portland, Denver, Austin, Chicago, and Boston. Each screen showed a face of a local coordinator who had been working tirelessly to adapt consciousness principles to their unique cultural context and community needs. The connection maintained universal principles of human awakening that transcended geographical boundaries without compromising local authenticity that gave each community its distinctive character and effectiveness. The question that had kept Joe awake for weeks centered on whether network coordination could preserve the authentic relationship-based qualities that made consciousness work genuinely transformative. Would scaling inevitably bureaucratize what had begun as organic community development? Could they maintain the intimate spiritual foundations that serve both personal growth and practical community needs while expanding across multiple cities? Maya's face appeared from Portland, where environmental activists had embraced consciousness techniques as tools for sustained ecological action. Her work served both inner development and outer environmental protection through awareness-enhanced activism that maintained political effectiveness while fostering spiritual growth. Elena connected from Denver, reporting on healthcare workers who were integrating awareness practices with patient care. Their approach enhanced both clinical effectiveness and healing relationships that served genuine therapeutic transformation rather than just medical efficiency. Leo coordinated from Austin, where artists and builders were exploring consciousness-informed construction that created spaces supportive of both individual creativity and community collaboration. His conscious architecture fostered authentic relationships while serving practical building needs that satisfied both spiritual development and conventional construction requirements. Tariq checked in from Chicago, where labor organizers were discovering how awareness practices could enhance collective bargaining effectiveness while maintaining worker solidarity and political urgency that addressed real economic challenges affecting working class communities. Each community had developed distinctive approaches that reflected their local culture and immediate needs. They maintained connection to consciousness principles that served human development rather than just organizational efficiency or spiritual satisfaction that might appeal to consciousness enthusiasts, but could demonstrate practical benefits for broader community applications. The morning's challenge would test whether network consciousness could naturally emerge from local authenticity or whether coordination requirements would impose artificial unity that compromised the cultural specificity that made each community's work genuinely effective. As Joe initiated the coordination session that would determine whether the network model could serve as a foundation for global consciousness community development, he carried the weight of representing not just individual community success, but an entirely new approach to human organization. This approach would either demonstrate the viability of awareness-based collective action or reveal fundamental limitations that required completely different strategies for serving human awakening and social transformation through practical applications that address both spiritual development and community empowerment needs. But the coordination session immediately revealed challenges that Joe hadn't anticipated during their months of local community development. Portland's environmental activists were facing pressure from city officials who questioned whether consciousness techniques were appropriate for environmental organizing that received municipal funding. Denver's healthcare workers were encountering resistance from medical administrators concerned about liability issues related to awareness practices in clinical settings that might compromise professional credibility or patient safety. Austin's creative community was dealing with gentrification pressures that threatened to displace the artists and musicians who had embraced consciousness approaches as tools for cultural preservation and creative collaboration. These pressures challenged their capacity to maintain both artistic authenticity and economic viability in rapidly changing urban environments. Chicago's labor organizers were confronting employer retaliation against workers who participated in consciousness-enhancing organizing activities that had proven more effective than conventional union tactics, but attracted corporate opposition. Each community's local challenges were revealing that consciousness work attracted resistance precisely because it enhanced people's capacity for authentic collaboration, creative problem solving, and sustained commitment to collective action. These capabilities threaten systems designed to maintain human limitation and fragmentation for the benefit of institutional control that preferred communities to remain divided and ineffective in addressing systemic challenges that affected human flourishing. Joe realized that network coordination wasn't just about connecting like-minded communities, it was about supporting consciousness work that was challenging established power structures in ways that individual spiritual development never could. Environmental consciousness integration was making ecological activism more effective through enhanced community solidarity and strategic clarity. Healthcare consciousness applications were improving patient outcomes while reducing provider burnout, though through healing relationships that serve both clinical effectiveness and human empowerment. Creative consciousness community building was fostering cultural preservation and economic cooperation that challenged gentrification pressures through authentic community collaboration. Labor consciousness organizing was enhancing worker solidarity and bargaining effectiveness through awareness practices that maintain political focus. While supporting individual development, the resistance patterns that each community faced suggested that consciousness approaches were proving too effective at empowering human communities to be ignored by forces that benefited from maintaining existing levels of limitation and unconsciousness. Network coordination would need to provide not just communication and resource sharing, but protection and strategic support for communities engaged in consciousness work that serve social transformation. Maya's voice carried strain as she described Portland's situation. She said, "The environmental consciousness integration is working better than we expected, but it's attracting attention from corporate interests that are used to dealing with environmental activists who burn out or get distracted by internal conflicts. Our community maintains strategic focus and emotional resilience that's making us more effective at challenging regulatory capture and corporate environmental destruction." Elena's report from Denver revealed similar patterns. Healthcare consciousness applications are generating measurable improvements in patient satisfaction, clinical outcomes, and provider wellness. But medical administrators are getting pressure from insurance companies and regulatory agencies that prefer healthcare systems designed around cost control rather than healing relationships and patient empowerment through therapeutic partnerships that serve authentic healing rather than just treatment delivery. Leo shared Austin's challenges. Conscious construction projects are creating spaces that foster community collaboration and creative expression in ways that support local culture and economic coordination. But real estate speculators and corporate developers are using zoning regulations and building codes to prevent consciousness-informed architecture that might interfere with gentrification and profit maximization that serves developer interest rather than community empowerment. Tariq describes Chicago's experience. Labor consciousness organizing is enhancing worker solidarity and strategic effectiveness in ways that make it harder for employers to divide or to use divide and conquer tactics. But we're facing coordinated opposition from corporate consultants and government agencies that specialize in disrupting effective union organizing through surveillance and infiltration designed to fragment worker solidarity and organizing effectiveness. The coordination session revealed that each community's local resistance was part of a systemic opposition to consciousness approaches that enhanced human capacity for awareness, collaboration, and effective action that challenged existing power structures. Network coordination would need to address not just communication and resource sharing between consciousness communities, but strategic coordination in response to institutional forces that recognize consciousness work as threat to established systems designed around human limitation and social fragmentation. Joe felt his first vulnerability moment of the day. The recognition that successful network coordination required him to accept responsibility for supporting communities engaged in consciousness work that was attracting systemic opposition from forces that operated with resources and strategies that individual communities couldn't address alone. Network coordination wasn't just about sharing best practices and emotional support. It was about collective defense of consciousness approaches that were proving effective enough to threaten established institutional systems. But the vulnerability moment also revealed possibilities that individual consciousness development had never offered. Each community's resistance challenges were providing information about institutional systems that other communities could use to prepare for similar opposition that targeted conscious work across multiple cities. Portland's experience with municipal pressure could help Chicago anticipate government interference with labor organizing. Denver's healthcare administration challenges could inform Austin's community space development strategies. The network was becoming an intelligent sharing system that enhanced each community's capacity to navigate institutional resistance while maintaining the authentic consciousness qualities that made their work genuinely transformative rather than just organizationally impressive. Instead of feeling isolated when facing opposition, each community could draw on collective experience and strategic support that made consciousness work more resilient under pressure from forces designed to fragment and discourage authentic community development. Elena observed that during the coordination session, she said, "We're not just sharing consciousness techniques anymore. We're developing collective capacity to maintain consciousness work under conditions designed to fragment and discourage authentic community development." The network is becoming a mutual aid system for communities engaged in consciousness approaches to social transformation that serve both spiritual development and practical community empowerment. Leo added, each community's construction challenges are teaching all of us about regulatory systems and institutional resistance patterns. When Austin faces building code complications, Denver can learn from our experience. When Portland encounters environmental permit challenges, Austin can share strategies. We're developing collective intelligence about navigating systems that weren't designed to support consciousness community development, but which we need to work within while maintaining our authentic approaches. Maya contributed that the network coordination is also revealing how consciousness work naturally creates connections between different forms of social interaction. Environmental consciousness integration connects with healthcare awareness applications. Creative community consciousness building supports labor organizing consciousness work. We're discovering that consciousness approaches enhance all forms of collective action that serve human development rather than institutional control or individual spiritual advancement that avoids engagement with practical community challenges. Tariq noted, labor consciousness is organizing, or labor consciousness organizing is learning from everyone else's experience with institutional resistance while contributing to our understanding of economic pressure tactics and corporate opposition strategies. Network coordination is making all our work more sophisticated and more effective at serving both consciousness development and practical community needs that extend beyond individual spiritual satisfaction to include real improvements in working conditions, healthcare access, environmental protection, and community empowerment. Joe realized that the morning's coordination session had revealed something unprecedented in his conscious development experience. Network consciousness that operated through principle transmission rather than technique replication. Each community's authentic approach to consciousness work was inspiring similar developments in other communities without requiring anyone to abandon their local cultural context or immediate practical needs that reflected their specific circumstances and community priorities. Portland's environmental consciousness integration was inspiring Chicago's labor organizers to incorporate ecological perspectives into economic justice work that connected workplace organizing with environmental protection. Denver's healthcare consciousness applications were enhancing Austin's creative community, those approaches that serve collective empowerment through cultural work that fostered both artistic development and community collaboration. Chicago's labor consciousness organizing was informing Portland's environmental activism with class analysis and economic strategy that connected ecological protection with economic justice. The network was demonstrating that consciousness communities could maintain their authentic local characteristics while creating connections that enhanced everyone's effectiveness in addressing systemic challenges that required both spiritual development and practical political engagement with institutional systems. Network coordination supported rather than homogenized local community development while creating collective capabilities that individual communities couldn't achieve alone. Joe's integration practice that afternoon involved sensing into the network consciousness that had emerged during the morning coordination session. Standing in his apartment, surrounded by equipment that connected him with consciousness communities hundreds of miles apart, he felt into the physical sensations that network coordination was creating in his own nervous system, and in the collective awareness that linked communities across different cultural contexts and geographical regions. The practice revealed that network consciousness operated through resonance rather than management, creating connections between communities that enhanced rather than diminished local authenticity while fostering collective intelligence that served both individual consciousness development and practical community empowerment. Each community's genuine approach to consciousness work created natural harmony with similar work in other locations without requiring coordination systems that might provide organizational efficiency but couldn't capture essential relational qualities. The stranger's teachings about service without ego attachment took on new meaning in this network context. Network coordination wasn't about controlling community development across multiple cities. It was about supporting each community's authentic consciousness work while creating communication channels and resource sharing systems that enhanced everyone's capacity to serve human development through awareness practices that address both spiritual growth and practical community needs. Joe's transformation came through recognizing that network consciousness gained its strength not from centralized coordination, but from local authenticity that created natural resonance. The most effective network coordination happened when communication systems supported rather than directed community-initiated consciousness work that served both individual awakening and collective empowerment through authentic community relationships rather than organizational management systems. The day's breakthrough occurred when Joe realized that network coordination challenges were teaching him about consciousness development at scales that individual spiritual practices had never accessed. Each community's authentic consciousness work was contributing to collective intelligence that transcended any single location while preserving the cultural specificity and local relationships that made awareness-based community development genuinely empowering rather than just organizationally impressive or spiritually satisfying, but practically ineffective. As the coordination session concluded, with unprecedented success, each community reported enhanced rather than diminished effectiveness through network connection. Joe understood that they'd discovered principles for consciousness-based collective organization that could serve as a foundation for global expansion. They had maintained the essential qualities that made their approaches genuinely transformative rather than just spiritually interesting, while proving that consciousness communities could scale their impact through authentic local development that created natural network coordination. The bridge to tomorrow's work emerged through Joe's recognition that network coordination and proven consciousness communities could maintain local authenticity while creating collective capabilities for addressing systemic challenges. But the success also revealed that consciousness work was attracting systemic opposition that individual communities could address alone, requiring network-level strategic coordination and mutual support systems that could protect communities engaged in awareness-based transformation work from institutional forces designed to fragment and discourage effective community development. The question that would drive the continued network development had become clear. Could consciousness communities develop collective capacity to maintain authentic awareness-based community development while providing protection and strategic support for communities facing institutional resistance, and designed to prevent consciousness approaches from demonstrating their effectiveness in serving both individual development and social transformation? The invisible work of consciousness development was becoming visible through network effects that connected communities across geographical and cultural boundaries while preserving local authenticity and cultural specificity. But visibility brought both opportunities for broader influence and dangers of institutional opposition that would test whether network consciousness could serve global transformation while protecting communities engaged in consciousness work from systemic efforts to fragment, co-opt, or destroy awareness-based approaches to human development and collective empowerment. The network coordination session has succeeded beyond Joe's expectations, proving that consciousness communities could scale their approaches through principle transmission rather than technique replication, while maintaining authentic local characteristics. But success had also revealed the challenges that would require unprecedented levels of network intelligence, strategic coordination, and collective defense of consciousness work that was proving effective enough to threaten institutional systems designed around assumptions of human limitation and fragmentation. Tomorrow would bring new tests of network coordination capabilities as communities faced increasing resistance from forces that recognize consciousness approaches as threats to existing power structures. These tests would determine whether network consciousness could provide both connection and protection for communities communities engaged in awareness-based transformation. This work that served human flourishing rather than institutional control, while maintaining the essential qualities that made consciousness work genuinely empowering for participants and effective for addressing systemic challenges that affected human communities regardless of their spiritual development level or commitment to consciousness approaches as a path to individual and collective transformation.